Snarling jaws dripping with radioactive venom lunged for vulnerable human flesh as the Pakled war beasts rampaged across Earth's surface. But the beasts learned a fatal lesson that day. Humans are the ultimate beast tamers. Listen up, rookies. You've all heard the stories of humanity's first contact with the Pakled, but you don't know the half of it, Captain Jason Bennett growled, his grizzled face illuminated by the dim light of the SS Odyssey's mess hall. The young recruits leaned forward, hanging on every word as the veteran took a long swig from his flask. It was 20 years ago when they came, a race of warriors bred for conquest. They'd already subjugated a dozen star systems, and Earth was next on their list. But they made a mistake. They underestimated us. Jason's cybernetic eye whirred as he focused on the wide-eyed faces before him. The Pakled didn't just send their armies. They sent their war beasts, genetically engineered monstrosities designed to tear through infantry like tissue paper. Each one was the size of a tank, with hide-like armor and claws that could shred steel. They dropped them on every continent, expecting them to rampage unchecked and soften us up for invasion. A dark chuckle escaped the captain's lips. But they forgot one thing. Humans have been taming wild animals for millennia. It's in our blood. The mess hall fell silent, the recruits holding their breath as Jason continued. The Pakled thought they'd broken our spirit when they bombed our cities and swarmed our skies with their drones. They were wrong. Even as the war beasts rampaged, people fought back. Soldiers, hunters, even civilians took up arms to defend their homes. Jason's voice dropped to a whisper, his eyes distant as he relived the memories. And when the dust settled, we didn't just have piles of war beast corpses. We had something else. Opportunity. The recruits exchanged glances, a mix of excitement and trepidation on their faces. They knew the stakes were high. If humanity failed to turn the tide against the Pakled, Earth would fall, and their species would be enslaved or exterminated. But in that moment, looking at the battle-hardened captain before them, they felt a glimmer of hope. If anyone could lead them to victory, it was Jason Bennett, the man who had seen the worst of the invasion and lived to tell the tale. The captain set his flask down with a resolute thud. So listen closely, rookies. You're about to hear the story of how we not only survived the Pakled's onslaught, but how we turned their own weapons against them. The story of how humans proved, once and for all, that we are the masters of our destiny. The recruits' eyes widened as Jason recounted the daring tale. Some even let out low whistles of appreciation. The grizzled captain's lips curled into a wry smile at their reaction. That's right, boys. A bunch of rough-and-tumble cowboys managed to wrangle one of them war beasts. Hog-tied it like a calf at a rodeo, Jason said, his voice tinged with admiration. Damn thing was thrashing and snarling, but they held on tight. Ropes were straining, horses were rearing, but those cowboys, they were laughing. He leaned forward, his cybernetic eye glinting in the dim light. It was a sight to behold, I tell you. That beast, all muscle and fury, finally tiring itself out. The cowboys managed to get a harness on it, and suddenly, it was like they had a new ranch hand. A damn strong one, at that. The recruits murmured amongst themselves, some in awe, others in disbelief. Jason held up a hand, silencing them. Word got around fast. Suddenly everyone wanted a piece of the action. Farmers, loggers, miners. They all started trying their hand at taming the beasts. It was chaos, but it was also opportunity. Those monsters could plow a field in half the time, haul twice as much timber, and dig through solid rock like it was butter. Jason's expression darkened, but not everyone was happy about it. Some folks wanted to kill the beasts on sight, saw them as nothing but a threat. Others, the science types, wanted to study them, figure out what made them tick. He sighed, shaking his head. And then there was the military. They saw the beasts as weapons, plain and simple, started rounding them up, taking them to secret bases out in the desert, experimenting on them, trying to turn them into something they could control. Jason's metal fist clenched. It was a powder keg ready to blow. You had folks who wanted to use the beasts, folks who wanted to kill them, and folks who wanted to understand them. All of them pulling in different directions. Jason's cybernetic eye whirred, accessing decades-old memories from the Pakled invasion. Just when we thought we had it under control, the Pakled came back, madder than a rattlesnake in a boot. Turns out, they'd been watching us from orbit, trying to suss out why their little invasion plan went sideways. The captain leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They saw what we'd done with their precious war beasts, and it riled them up something fierce. Demanded we hand them over, claiming they were Pakled property. But by then, those beasts weren't just livestock to us, they were partners, friends even. We weren't about to just let the Pakled take them back without a fight. Jason's lips curled into a humorless grin. So the Pakled landed in force, targeting every ranch, farm and homestead where the war beasts were being kept. They figured they could just round them up like stray cattle, but they underestimated the bond that had formed between man and beast. When the Pakled soldiers came knocking, the creatures fought right alongside us, ripping into those alien bastards with the same fury we felt. The captain's eyes took on a distant look, as if he were reliving the battles in his mind. It was a hell of a sight, let me tell you. Farmers riding war beasts into the fray, blasting away with shotguns. Loggers charging in with chainsaw axes, hacking through Pakled armor like it was kindling. Miners stomping around in jerry-rigged power loaders, smashing alien skulls with pneumatic fists. We gave the Pakled a real taste of their own medicine. But Jason's expression darkened, his voice growing heavy. Problem was the Pakled had numbers on their side, and they didn't much care how many of their own they had to sacrifice. They just kept coming, wave after wave, like a damn flood. Started to look like we might get swept away. He paused, his metal hand clenching into a fist. That's when the military boys stepped in. Remember those hush-hush experiments they'd been running? Turns out they'd cracked the code on controlling the war beasts, turning them into living, breathing weapons. They unleashed a whole damn army of the things, each one kitted out with high-tech armor and cybernetics. It was like something straight out of a science fiction flick, except it was all too real. A shiver ran through the mess hall as Jason's words hung in the air. The recruits stared at him, some wide-eyed, others with a grim set to their jaws. They had heard stories of the war, but never like this. Never with such raw, unvarnished truth. Jason's cybernetic eye whirred softly as he scanned their faces. I was there in the thick of it, he said, his voice low and rough. Saw it all with my own eyes. The enhanced war beasts, they were something else. Unstoppable, relentless. They tore through the Pakled like they were nothing. He paused, his organic eye closing for a moment. But they didn't stop there. They turned on us, on the people who had fought alongside them, who had risked everything to tame them. It was hell, plain and simple. His voice dropped to a whisper. I saw a farmer, a man who had raised one of those beasts from a hatchling, torn apart by the very creature he had loved. I saw soldiers, men and women I had fought beside, crushed beneath the claws of the monsters they had once commanded. Jason's metal fist clenched, the servos whining softly. The screams, the roar, they blended together until you couldn't tell them apart. Blood mixed with hydraulic fluid, flesh with metal. It was a nightmare made real. He fell silent for a long moment, the only sound the hum of the ship's engines. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with the weight of memory. We won in the end, drove the Pakled off, but the cost, he shook his head. Entire cities reduced to rubble, fields burned, forests leveled, and the war beasts, most of them had to be put down, put out of their misery. His gaze drifted, focusing on something only he could see. Some got away, though, disappeared into the wilderness, and sometimes on quiet nights you can still hear them, howling in the distance like they're calling to each other, like they remember. Jason's eye snapped back to the recruits, his voice hardening. The government, they tried to cover it up, spun a pretty story about humanity's triumph over adversity, but those of us who were there, we know the truth. We carry it with us every day. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. And that's why you're here, recruits, because the fight isn't over. The Pakled, they're still out there. And those war beasts, the ones that survived, they're out there too, waiting, biding their time. Jason's metal hand slammed onto the table, making the recruits jump. But we'll be ready for them. We have to be, because if we're not, if we fail, then all those sacrifices, all that pain and death, it will have been for nothing. He stood abruptly, his cybernetic limbs whirring. Get some rest, recruits. Tomorrow your real training begins, and trust me, you're going to need every ounce of strength and courage you can muster. With that, Jason strode from the mess hall, leaving the recruits in a heavy, contemplative silence. They had joined the fight against the Pakled for glory, for adventure. But now, faced with the grim reality of what that fight entailed, they couldn't help but wonder. Were they truly ready for the horrors that awaited them? The metallic collar glints coldly in the harsh lights of the mess hall as it passes from hand to hand. Each recruit examines it, their faces a mix of fascination and revulsion. The weight of it is surprising, a tangible reminder of the power once wielded over the war beasts. Jason watches them, his expression unreadable. That collar represents a lot of things, he says, his voice rough with emotion. Power, control, but also arrogance. We thought we could play God, that we could master these creatures and bend them to our will. But in the end we were just as much slaves to our own hubris. He steps forward, taking the collar back from the last recruit. His fingers close around it, the metal biting into his palm. I keep this as a reminder of what we did, what we created. It's a weight I carry every day. Jason looks up, his gaze sweeping over the recruits. You're the ones who will have to deal with the fallout of our actions. The Pakled, the war beasts, they're still out there, and they're not going to forget what we did to them. He leans forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. There have been reports, you know, sightings of the beasts in the wild, far from any human settlement. Some say they've even started breeding, creating a new generation of monsters. The recruits shift uneasily, glancing at each other with wide eyes. The thought of facing these creatures born of science and rage is a daunting prospect. Jason straightens, his cybernetic limbs whirring softly. But that's a problem for another day. Right now you've got a job to do. You're the guardians of humanity, the ones who will stand against whatever threats come our way. He fixes them with a piercing stare, his words heavy with meaning. Just remember, when you're out there facing the unknown, that even the most noble intentions can lead to hell, and that sometimes the greatest monsters are the ones we create ourselves. With that, Jason turns and strides from the room, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the corridor. The recruits are left alone, the weight of his words hanging over them like a shroud. They look at each other, their faces a mix of determination and fear. They know they are the inheritors of a legacy, one that is as much a burden as it is an honor. As they gaze out the windows of the ship, watching the stars drift by, their thoughts turn to the future. What new horrors might await them in the depths of space? Will they be strong enough to face the challenges ahead? One thing is certain, the war against the Pakled, against the very monsters humanity created, is far from over, and these young recruits, with all their hopes and fears, will be the ones to carry the fight forward. The ship hums with energy as it pushes deeper into the void, carrying its cargo of soldiers and secrets. In the mess hall, the recruits sit in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.